Hi there, this is Jason again, and this is Open English. This is the third template and general material that I've presented in this little series. They are open source teaching materials that you can use as are, or you can adapt them in the open source versions and play around with them and use them as you will. Now, in this one, I've given this one the title of Turn Right, and you can see we've got the image of a speeding car there, and it happens to be turning right, which is lucky. Um, with all these, with many of these Open English titles, I try to make the title itself something that can be a point of discussion. Even the idea of just turning right in terms of direction, but also right in terms of doing it properly, or heading in the right direction in some other way in terms of right being correct. So I try to think of little titles that can be language discussion points and conversation points on their own. And sometimes I do it well, sometimes I don't. But this one, Turn Right, um, as you can see now, I've done some slightly different things on this one compared to the previous two. There are some similarities, but I'm going to show you some different things that might be done with this kind of material now. Now remember, because of these are open source and these activity sections have been boxed and grouped in the open source versions, it means you can tear them out and replace them with stuff of your own, but you could also tear them out and replace them with stuff that was in previous lessons as well, if you find that you've got a good rhythm going or you want to do it in a different way. So they're very, very flexible in terms of how you use these. But the way I've set up this one is we've got larger boxes up here, because I'm not so much looking for just a one word, four words. Because this is the general theme of driving and being in a car, I think that's fairly relevant to a lot of people and their lives. What I would be doing is asking the learners to, well, in my case, I would ask them to come up with four traffic signs. Things that signs that are seen on the road. Now, if I'm in an ESL context, or as in a context where English is spoken, I would encourage them to try and sketch signs that they've seen in this country where they are learning English. But in an EFL context, I might actually give them the choice of coming up with road signs that they know exist in other countries. But most likely, I would say, just show me four signs that you see in your country, here in your own country. And they could draw those signs in. They could sketch them. They don't have to be works of art. And based on the signs that they draw, I would ask them to describe what they mean. What is that sign telling us? And I would get them to actually try and describe those signs here. As with my other Open English material, we've got an open space here for discussion, for writing notes, for extending and exploring language patterns, corrections, as well as good models, as we share the information around the group. Now, look, if you're not into that, if you don't think that would be a good idea, just before I go on, why would I get them to put signs that they see in their own country that are not written in English? Well, what my rationale for that is that it would be good if they could explain to English-speaking visitors to their country what those road signs in their country mean. So it does have a practical purpose. If they have visitors in their country, it's good if they can explain to them what the signs on the roads mean. So it does have a practical application. But if signs are not your go here, another thing you could do is have the learners sketch in items relevant to this theme. And they may come up with things like a license plate, keys, whatever. Even money, because this is obviously an expensive car. They may sketch in money. So it is similar to the other materials in that sense in terms of Lexis, but we're getting them to sketch it this time instead of just writing the word. And then we might actually, if they're drawing in items here, to give clues here to make them into riddles and say this is an item that you use to start your car, if that one was keys. And we might even get them to scramble them so that they can pass it to a classmate who has to guess which sentence goes with which picture. And that could be a pretty creative, very interactive little application. So there's two very different ways we could use those illustration boxes and these sentence boxes that follow. Now looking at B, now I've set this up. Now there's 100 different ways you can use this setup. One way is to do what I call linking. And that is to come up with 4 statements or sentences here and then find ways to link them. So as an example, if the learners were to try and describe what they see in this picture, and maybe one of the students suggests, and we'd do this as a group first on the board in terms of generating these sentences. Maybe one learner says, this is a very expensive car. Well, I might say, maybe over here we could make a link with the idea of must be to create logical deductions. So this is an expensive car. The owner must be wealthy, or the owner must have a lot of money. The car is driving really fast. That could be the car is moving very quickly. The driver must be in a hurry, or the driver must be, careless. There's all sorts of sentences that could come up as a reasonably logical deduction based on that first sentence. So that's one way I could do grammar style linking to expand concepts. Another thing, if that sounds too advanced, we could get them to simply write sentences here in a certain tense, for example in the present continuous, and then we could get them to change it to the past or to the future. We could even use these 2 boxes to create conditional statements with the first part of the conditional here and the second part there. There's all sorts of possibilities, and we have some space here on the right, which part of our board work would be to write in some of the basic rules and some of the patterns that use that grammar. So that's one way we could use this in a very grammar oriented way. But you may not want to go with grammar. So another thing you could do is to have the learners write 4 questions related to this theme, which they then ask to a classmate and they write in the answers. And that is, do you like cars? Do you have your license? They could come up with a variety of questions. We could brainstorm them together and they could just write down the answers from a classmate. So we could avoid grammar altogether and go with more of a information gathering exercise here. So again, it's all about options, and you will know or should know what your learners need at any given stage and what might work for them and keep them learning and interested. So going over onto the next page, again I've got one of these text boxes, but it's considerably smaller than the ones on the other templates. And again, I just want them to write a quick account or story or text or dialogue by themselves or with a classmate. And you'll see this pop up either on the first page of the material or on the second very, very regularly. Now, not always, but quite often in my Open English materials, because I always think it's important to give the learners a chance to slow down, to think for themselves, to actually build a situation and express that with language, and just give them that time to consolidate and really think their way through something in writing or composition if it's they're composing a dialogue. And I might even get them to write a poem or do some haiku, or there's all sorts of possibilities that I could be using this space for. The sky's the limit. Again, I could be using this space to give the learners feedback, or I could, if I want to control it more, work with the learners on the board and create a sort of plan on what we want to see in this quick text, or a couple of items of language or sentence structures, and then they have to apply that here. So that's another way I could use it. But again, it's all about getting them to be very productive. But there's not a lot to do there. There's not a huge amount. It's not going to take them all day, and we can move on to something else. And I think that's also very important in my own methodology. Sometimes it's not a good thing, especially in the classroom time, to have them really poring over something for 50 minutes. It's good if it's a writing task, if it can be over in sort of 10 to 15 or 20 minutes in some cases, depending on the level, depending on the needs of your students. And it could be even, they could even come up with quick newspaper reports related to the idea of traffic and cars and safety or whatever. They could even write safety instructions here, a list of recommendations, and it could even draw on some of those grammar patterns that we explored here. We could do should and have to here. And over here we could apply that in some sort of instructional text. So there's some good options there. Now in D, we've got 3 basic boxes there. Again, there's a big variety of things we could do. The thing that stands out to me is the idea of pronunciation here. This is not something that I've covered really in the first 2 templates. I think it's something that is needed a lot and needed regularly, and the way I would probably handle pronunciation here is to get the learners to write in some words. I could choose them for them based on the lesson so far, or we could brainstorm new ones, and we write in a couple of words here, and we could do some focus on consonants, initial consonants, final consonants, or vowels or consonant clusters or diphthongs. We could change it from lesson to lesson. And then over here in this box, we could either make this about consonants, this about vowels, or we could do it the other way, or we could use this box for syllables, working more on the student's ability to accurately identify and enunciate the syllables in words. And it could be the same words here, but we transfer them over, and now we mark where the syllables and the syllable stress is. So that's a nifty way of handling some pronunciation at word level. And then I might say, well, take 2 or 3 of those words, put them into sentences here, and we'll work on your sentence stress and your rhythm and intonation, and we'll mark those things out. We could do it as a group in terms of the words that come in here and the sounds and syllables, and we could do this part as a group as well, or we could take one element of these 3 and have the learners do that by themselves and just sharing the results. Again, we've got space here on the right for those little rules and patterns and tips that teachers can come up with to help the learners. For example, that ed ending. When is it a t? When is it a d? When is it an ud? These are little rules that we can sketch out on the whiteboard, and they've got space to note them down. So there's that language record there, which I think is really essential. And again, we've got a third open page here if you want to go on with it or do something completely different. Now, as I said at the start, remember all of these things can be just deleted out of the template. You could replace them with other things. This is not a lesson set in stone. This is just another variety of activities and approaches. Again, though, it really does work on emergent principles of what we can generate as a group, what learners can contribute, and then how we can extend that, work it into language patterns and notice things about how the language works and create that record on paper. This is the car theme. I mean, with the open template, the open source template, you could keep these activities, but you could replace it with a completely different picture and change the title. Because it's an open source document, you can do that. You would just click on the picture and right click and change picture, choose a picture you've got somewhere on file and slot it in and move it around until it's in the right spot, and change the heading. And you could use the very similar activities but with a completely different theme. So I don't think it's all about getting locked into the idea of cars and traffic. So that's the Turn Right template. I hope that's given you some new ideas for your materials design as well as your teaching methods for a more emergent style, a more open style that involves the learners a lot more in this process. And I look forward to bringing you another Open English lesson template next week. So thanks and happy teaching.